Today, we will be covering the topic of mirrors, windows, and lenses, the impact of early messages. I do want to make a note that today is going to be part one in a two-part series. So we're glad to have you with us here today. And at the end of the webinar, we'll provide a registration link for part two, which will occur next month.
Erin is an independent equity, diversity, and inclusion consultant and founder of ACT Consulting. Activate, challenge, and transform. I mean, the name of and purpose behind that is so powerful. So Erin has a proven track record of supporting the creation of equitable and brave communities. She is focused on building relationships, managing projects from concept to outcome measurements, as well as designing and adapting trainings and presentations based on the community's needs and goals. And prior to being an independent consultant, Erin worked at the Anti-Defamation League for 7 years, where her final position was the Director of Education, Southern Division. And we have Perry, who is just absolutely incredible, and you'll get to meet both of them in a minute. Just their energy is amazing. And Perry strives to create communities of respect in schools and neighborhoods through educational workshops with students, teachers, parents, caregivers, and community members. The goal of Perry's work is to create inclusive, diverse, and brave environments by naming our intersecting identities, exploring and taking ownership of our explicit and implicit bias, dismantling positive and negative stereotypes, and acknowledging all levels of power and privilege. And I just have to say, as we were preparing for this webinar, just with the two of them, do they both embody what they stand for and their purpose in educating and sharing a piece of who they are with us. I've learned so much already. So I'm excited for all of you to get a chance to hear from them, and welcome Erin and Perry.
Thank you. We're thrilled to be here. Sarai and Tandra, thank you so much for the invitation. I mean, as y'all said, the short time that we have spent with y'all has been amazing. I can't wait to spend time with you in person, because I think as y'all will see today, we just, the conversations are so authentic. And so today may be a little different. We asked Sarai and Tandra to join us on this webinar. And so really going over early messages, the impact of them, and also having a conversation from 4 women across the country, bringing in different lived experiences, identities, messages that we received. And so we are thrilled to be here. Again, I'm Erin Beecham. I use she, her pronouns. My friend, colleague, fellow activator, Perry, is with me. We are friends in real life. And so I think that you will also see some of that come out, that we not only are business partners and founders of ACT Consulting, but we actually really love each other and are friends in real life. So I think you'll see that. Perry, anything before we dive in?
I'm just excited to be here. Thank you all for the opportunity. And shout out to whoever played Harry Styles on the entry, because I don't know if you can tell behind me over my shoulder, I'm a big Harry Styles fan. So I appreciated that. Literally sent Erin a text message and was like, "Who's playing Harry Styles?" I got so excited. So that's the vibe that I'm on. Excited.
All right, here we go. You know, I gotta click all the buttons to get here. All right, so impact of early messages. We heard from Sarai and Tandra earlier about the indigenous peoples of Arizona, and we also wanted to acknowledge coming from Atlanta, Georgia, that we are on Cherokee and Muskogee tribal nations, and so wanted to add that part from where we are as well. And so acknowledging the genocide and the history of those indigenous peoples in Atlanta, the Cherokee and Muskogee tribal nations. So ACT, as Sarai said, ACT stands for Activate, Challenge, Transform. We are an equity, diversity, and inclusion consulting firm. And so we strive to activate dialogue, growth, and connections. We challenge inequity, language, and bias. You will hear us talk a lot about the power of language and the power of words. And so that is really one of the things that we base so many of our webinars, presentations, whatever it is, around the power of language. And then the goal is to transform culture, systems, and ourselves. And I think as Perry starts talking about windows, lenses, and mirrors, we'll see that transformation of ourselves specifically as we are talking about the early messages that we receive. So we have some activator beliefs. I won't go through all of these. You see that we believe that language is powerful, change requires action, listening to learn, equity fosters belonging, leaning into the discomfort. Sarai talked about that earlier, right? As we're talking about early messages and we're asking us to think about us as young folks, it may bring up some discomfort in leaning into that. And then oftentimes Perry and I use expect and accept non-closure. And we are all coming to this webinar in different places along this journey and understanding that even the four of us are always doing this work, right? It is not just something that we do as an employment or occupation, that we live our lives in this way. And that in order to do that, we have to continue to do the work. And so expecting and accepting non-closure, because this work doesn't end, and it's always evolving and changing. So Perry, windows, mirrors, and lenses, I'm passing it over to you.
All right, let's get into it. So windows, mirrors, and lenses. I'm sure as you all have started your journey in your discussions on equity and diversity and inclusion, that these tools come up. And if they haven't, welcome to the conversation. So as we're thinking about the reasons you are here, okay, what brought you to a webinar on early messages? What compelled you to attend a summit on equity and inclusion? Besides possibly being voluntold by your boss or your professor, or even getting a gentle nudge from a colleague, I'm going to assume it's because at the end of the day, as we all do, we want to learn to be better humans. Part of being a better human is taking an intentional moment of pause to decipher and unpack how we got here, how and if we are seen, how we show up, and how we view the world. Sometimes this process, this journey is uncomfortable and messy, as we talked about leaning into that discomfort. And part of it is because our intersecting identities can be messy. Our individual histories are rich and layered and complex and complicated. And in order to create and be the change that we want to see in the world, it should all start with the person in the mirror. Shout out to MJ. This is your mirror work. Interestingly enough, in doing this work, one of the things that we've learned is that as a society, we tend to analyze the outside world through a lens first. We analyze before we reflect. What's the problem with that? Well, when we use the lens, it defines what we see before we actually see it. A lens is outward facing, right? So it doesn't always reflect the actual truth. Think about all the media we consume, the literal and figurative filters on information, on pictures, on special family moments that might not have actually been that special. What parts of our stories or the stories of others are being left out or zoomed in on? Where is the bias in our vision? Where did it come from? Who or what is creating the framing? And I want to ask, and you all feel free to answer this question in the chat, why is self-reflection, aka your mirror work, an important first step? Well, what do you do when you go to look at that fresh cut you just got and there are water droplets and toothpaste drips and maybe a little overspray from your oil sheen on the mirror. This is speaking from personal experience, right? You clean it up. You clean it up. You want it to be crisp and clean and fresh so that it can reflect back the best you possible. Those spots, which we can call, maybe they represent our biases. They obstruct our view. That mirror is supposed to serve as your truth, your accountability, and your responsibility. For a window, feel free again to answer this question in the chat. Why are windows relevant to this work? How do we use windows as educators, as professionals, as colleagues, as fellow humans? We can use our classrooms, our offices, our lunch and learns, and our conversations with strangers and family members as an incredible tool to expose ourselves to the daily lived experiences of cultural groups and communities outside of our own. We can also choose to put up bars and shutters and curtains to block out new information, new people, new experiences that don't fit into the filtered lenses of our comfortability and assumed understanding of others. Our goal today is to acknowledge and understand how to better use all three of these tools, our window, our mirror, and our lens, in order to understand ourselves and our individual stories a little better. Who are you? Who taught you who you are? Who taught you who you were supposed to be? What were you or weren't you exposed to? And what do you need in order to create change in yourself and in the world? See, the chat's lighting up.
Thank you, Perry. So we're going to go ahead and dive into early messages. And again, thinking about the windows, lenses, and mirrors, right? And so we are going to ask some questions, and then please, again, feel free to put them in the chat. And then the four of us are going to kind of just chime in and talk a little bit about our own individual messages that we received, and then also how they have impacted us. And we'll get to that in just a little bit. So this is about unlearning. Again, like we are all, the four of us are coming from different backgrounds, different lived experiences. And so even, I am a white woman, I'm 43, and I was born and raised in Atlanta, lived in North Carolina for a little bit, and now am back in Atlanta, and I have a wife and two small kids. And again, like that, it's a very small part of who I am, and how all of that, again, all those early messages impact who I am. And so we'll get a little bit into who each of the other colleagues are in just a second. But even as we're talking about unlearning, we want to just kind of say in general, let's, even take our DEI hats off for just a second, but in general, what is something that you have had to unlearn? And so when I talk about this, oftentimes I talk about when I left my previous job, and what I had been doing for years and years and years was looking at my phone and my email. The very first thing that I did at 6 a.m. or 5 a.m. or whatever time it was, I checked my email, and I had to unlearn that when I left that previous job, and how long it took to unlearn that. And so opening it up, that is one, and y'all, I'm still unlearning that. I will be totally honest. There are moments where I still look at my phone at 6 a.m. or 11 p.m. or whatever it is to check my email just in case, right? Something has come in. So thoughts on unlearning in general, what y'all have had to unlearn?
Someone said they had to unlearn self-doubt and the stigma around failure.
Yeah, diving in.
We're starting off hot. Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely. The stigma around failure. That's a lot. Had to learn what I wanted to do. I was always told that I should be in the business field, but I really wanted to be a teacher, and I finally opened myself up to that, and I'm so glad I did. Love that power. Love that level of self-awareness. I have to unlearn to trust people who act like they're my friend. As the caregiver and parent of an 11-year-old, friendship. We are constantly having those conversations. And I'm also an adult who has lost friends, right? I think we forget sometimes how that unlearning and learning with regard to relationships acts. Let's see, I had to unlearn us and them and relearn we. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. Everyone's needs come before mine.
Mm.
And even, I mean, even when we're doing this work, we know how important self-care is. I mean, self-care is important in general, right? But if we are talking about it even from a lens of EDI, how important that is to clock out for a minute and say, you know what, I need to rest. And as an advocate, and we call ourselves activators, that it's okay to push pause and say, I need to rest for just a second so that I am ready to continue activating and doing all of these things.
Absolutely. Someone in the chat said, I've had to unlearn the assumption that I can do anything if I try hard enough. Aging and chronic illness have taught me that lesson. And just want to shout out that response, especially because when we talk about our intersecting identities and ability status, right? The things that people see and don't see. So the assumptions that people make about what we're going through on a daily basis. Thank you for that. Thank you for that reminder.
I saw that no is a complete sentence. I need to write that down. No is don't need an explanation. Don't need it. Just no. I love that. Thank you to whoever wrote that. Thank you.
Absolutely. Ooh, I had to unlearn about allowing everyone in my life, no matter what, specifically setting boundaries. I'm going to snap that one. Setting boundaries is a big thing. It's a healthy thing. It's a healthy thing. A lot of email. We all are on this. I need to not be on my phone, not check my email status, right? Absolutely. I had to unlearn that the ultimate feeling of satisfaction comes from receiving. When it is giving is the thing that does it. I love that. I love that. You all were not finished with the unlearning conversation. In fact, we'll continue with that into the second session, the July session as well. But I'm glad that you all are keeping that in the forefront of your mind. It's a running list, unfortunately and fortunately, of things that we are socialized to do and be. And hopefully after today's conversation, we'll have a better understanding of maybe some additional things that we need to unlearn. Thank you all.
Sarai and Tandra, anything before we move on and dive a little deeper?
You know, I mean, all these comments, I'm like keeping note of them because I just need to have them on a Post-it note every day, reminding myself like, no is a complete sentence. And I have to say that setting boundaries and really that indirect level of shame and guilt of growing up first generation immigrant parents and really integrating that side of my identity and the what's instilled of you go, you have to work, you have to keep going, and the sacrifices that were made along the way and to provide you the privilege of being here. There's that voice in the back of my head saying you can't rest. So therefore there's no boundaries, healthy boundaries set in place because there's that voice that's louder than what really needs to happen. And so these comments are incredible.
Absolutely.
And I'll add to that. Eva's comment, I don't know what to unlearn. I kind of sat with that for a minute because I think in doing this work, you go into it with, these are all of the things that I know I need to unlearn. How do I do better? How do I help this community? How do I support this community? But then you start to look at, okay, there's some things that I don't need to unlearn because I need to carry this experience so that I can be better to this community. I need to carry this experience so that this person understands that's a valid experience that I had. So when you that saying of meeting people where they're at, when you come to meet me, you need to understand where I'm coming from. You need to know what I've experienced. Yes, you may be a woman and I'm a woman, I'm a Black woman. So you have to add a layer onto that. So we don't always relate on the same things. And I need to make it okay. I think that sometimes even for Sarai and I, we have conversations where we've been in meetings or talks with individuals where we're sending a message to each other behind the scenes, like, ooh, should we say something about that? And we still struggle with those microaggressions and when to say something and when not to say something, justifying the way that we felt. So I think, Eva, that was really, it's very simply stated, but that really sat with me. I think I'm going to ponder on that one for a little bit.
Awesome. Thanks, y'all. All right, we're gonna keep diving in.
So as we are unpacking the things that we need to unlearn, or even imagining what that even feels like, looks like, one of the questions that we think about, there's a culture of, right? There's a culture that we exist, and we actually exist in several cultures that perpetuates some of the things that we're trying to unlearn, or that we are trying to get uncomfortable and comfortable with learning, relearning, and unlearning. And when we even talk about culture, what is it? I think it's a word that we throw around quite often. In the chat, let me know. What is culture? How would you define culture? One of the things that Aaron mentioned in the beginning was, we believe language is power. And so one of the things that we think is really important is when we talk about specific words, we want to make sure that we're understanding a full definition. So what is culture? When we use that word, what does that mean? Interestingly enough, someone in the chat said, I learned after marrying my husband that I had to set boundaries with my in-laws, and that I have my own voice that is just as loud and important as those of my in-laws who are very comfortable in not learning about other cultures. So thank you for using the word culture. All right, someone said culture is the way we are raised and where we are from through our family. Absolutely. Beliefs that are passed down from generation to generation. Norms and values that belong to specific demographics or populations. I'm going to do a language check on that, because when we use the word norm, that stands for normal, right? And if something's normal, then the opposite of that would be abnormal. So wanting to be aware of when we use certain words that become default, that there are positives and negatives to both of those. Love that. Cultures combine beliefs, customs, language, and guides you live by, a way of life. Yes, absolutely. For the purposes of today, we're going to give you an extraordinarily long definition. Culture means the patterns and characteristics of human behavior. Culture is one collective term of religion, beliefs, social norms, mention that, arts, customs, expectations, and habits that we possess. So as we're talking about culture, think about the cultural groups that you belong in. Even today, because we are 100 and something people from different places, we wanted to take the opportunity to figure out what cultural groups we have in the building today. So we want you all to, if you have access to your phone, you can do it on your computer. We are going to do a little Minty. We want to see who's here, who's representing. All right. Sarai put the participation link for the Minty in the chat. There's a QR code up. So we want to know what cultural groups are existing here today. And we know that there are many, 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 many more. So our age range, okay. 20 to 29. All right, I'm forever 29. I like to say. Interesting. I'm glad we don't have any people that don't want to answer. Proud of you for that. Thank you. Thank you. All right. All right. Someone said they've been 35 for a while. I'm always interested. I feel like we don't talk about age enough in positive ways, right? And we'll get into why that might be important for today a little bit later rather. Okay, this is an interesting spread. I'm really encouraged by all the wisdom that is in the group. This is great. All right. And the next question, what's our next question in the Minty? The region that you were born, not necessarily where you're living, it may be the same place, but where were you born? For instance, I'm from Pittsburgh, but I live in Atlanta. Go Steelers. It's a conflicting house. My husband, partner, baby daddy is born and raised in ATL. He's a diehard Falcons fan. All right, we got Midwest, Iraq. Trinidad, yes. We're from all this. You amazing. Representation. We're international up here. Shout out to Pittsburgh. Yes, this is great. We have Mexico, the Pacific Northwest, Arizona. There was a lot of shout outs specifically just to people from Arizona in the chat. I saw that. I won't see that as hateration. Fort Wayne, okay. Navajo Nation, yes. North Dakota, Mississippi, Hermosillo, Sonora, Long Beach, absolutely, absolutely. Missouri, somebody said, Peru. Wow, that's incredible. That's incredible. I love that. I love that. Okay. And our next question, where are you living now? Where do you live now? Someone was born in the Seattle area, currently in North Dakota. Yes. Just thinking about how all these different cultural groups existing from the Midwest to international communities to the North, all the weather that I'm imagining in all of these different places. Texas, yes. Michigan, London. Someone said they miss winter. I do too. This is incredible. The reach, the fact that we have so many places represented today that are wanting to do this work, that are wanting to expand their knowledge and engage in different conversations. That's a great question. It was actually asked in the chat. How does where you live impact your culture? Great question. Stay tuned. Stay tuned. But that's a phenomenal question for today. Absolutely. All right, and the next question, your racial identity. Racial identity. How are we identifying today? What racial cultural groups are represented? All right, we got white. That was a big one. Afro-Latina, yes. Navajo, Hispanic, Caucasian. We got a human race, yes. And obviously you all know how the Minties work. So the bigger that the word is, the more people that have used that cultural group. We have white, Hawaiian, and Irish. Okay. Mexican, yes. Indonesian, Mayo Sapien. Wow. This is beautiful. This is beautiful. Haitian, Bahamian, Dominican. Yes. Thank you. Thank you. These are all rich cultural groups that will significantly, I'm so excited about the conversation that is about to be had. This is great. All right, and our last question, what religious cultural groups do we have here? Interesting. Muslim, atheist, non-denominational, spiritual, Nation of Islam, absolutely, Catholic, Christian, Native American Church, Episcopalian, agnostic. Oh, the perspectives, Jewish, Latter-day Saints, yes. Did I see unchristian in there? Yes. Secular, humanist, spiritual agnostic. We have Pentecostal. Oh, the richness of conversation, the richness of existence and representation here. Great job. Thank you all so much for being here. Thank you all. And thank you for participating in the Minty to let us know that you're here. We appreciate you. We appreciate you. So our next part is a conversation with Sarai and Tandra. We thought that we would do something a little bit different and kind of have an organic conversation that explains and expresses who we all are in this moment. And our goal in doing this is honestly to model how we have some interesting conversations to find out more about who our colleagues are, who our neighbors are, who the people that cross our paths. what makes them them? What makes them them? So we thought we'd introduce them into our world a little bit so they don't get to stand back here. And welcome, welcome.
Thank you.
So I dove in a little bit earlier, and I think just to give a little perspective of, I said I identify as a white woman in the South with 2 small kiddos and a wife. Perry said she's from Pittsburgh. I guess I'll say go Steelers for you. Anything else, Perry, that you've dropped some other little hints, but anything else that you want to add to that as we're talking about, as we dive into our early messages?
Absolutely. I am a Black woman who is married to a white man. We are both cisgender. I use she, her pronouns. I am the caregiver, like I mentioned, to a little 11-year-old special person who has my sparkling personality and his father's eating habits. Which are all great, by the way. Can you tell by the expression on my face?
Tandra and Sarai, yeah, please.
Right, I guess I'll jump in, even though Perry's a tough act to follow. She's so energetic and funny. Well, I am a Black woman. My mother is biracial. She identifies as white and Black. She is adopted, so more identifying with her Black side. And that is the only side that we know. I have a 26-year-old daughter who is a new doula, specifically serving women of color. I have an amazing, beautiful young granddaughter who is 2 years old. And I am married to my husband. Well, I guess I hope I'm married to my husband. He identifies as a Black male. I do want to share a fun fact about my family. I have a niece by marriage who came out a few years ago, specifically to myself and my daughter, before coming out to the rest of the family, asked for us to assist her with having a conversation with her uncle, her mom, and her grandma. I really take that in the highest regard that she trusted us with that information and how to break that down. So yes, Trina, I do have a 26-year-old daughter and I am 30. So I'll let you all figure that one out. Sarai?
Sarai Lopez, Sarai Lopez, I go by both, and I fully embrace both names as they are part of my identity of being born in Utah and raised in Mexico. I am the daughter of immigrant parents from Chihuahua, Mexico, and Latina of Mexican descent, and proud mom of a bonus daughter, 20-year-old bonus daughter that keeps me on my toes, but more than anything, my father, I am his caregiver, and he definitely keeps me on his toes. Very traditional Mexican, macho, Latin lover tendencies, keeps me entertained. So that is part of all of who I am, from neither from here nor there yet. I'm rich in cultures from all across. So glad to be part of this incredible conversation.
Awesome. Thanks, y'all. We're going to dive in. So again, this is thinking way back, right? Although we're all, Tandra's just 37 or 34, Perry's 29. So it doesn't take us very long to go back too far to our early messages. But the first question that we want to talk about is, who were your first socializers? Who were the people, and y'all please continue to light up the chat because this is awesome. I saw mom that popped up. Who were your first socializers? As you're thinking about who were the folks that were providing those like very early messages on. So I see cousins, mom, dad, uncle, family. And I think I would include parents and grandparents, absolutely. And then, of course, as we got older, more folks in that. But I see a lot of that, parents, grandparents, family members. Anybody else? I think I saw dogs just went by. I feel like I need to scroll back up for that. Aunts, uncles, cousins. Yeah. I see a teachers.
Oh, church family first socializers, coaches. Absolutely. Even in our introductions, how quick we were to make sure we put in our family thing, right? Like whatever that is, demonstrating our family relationships. So obviously that's coming up very clear as the people that help us to move through the world, right? Family and teachers, peers and supporters, siblings, yes, supervisors. That's an interesting, I have not heard that one, supervisors as first socializers. And when we say socializers, does everyone understand, just to check to make sure we got our language on, everyone understands what we mean by socializers?
Maybe you should define it just to make sure that everyone understands.
Absolutely. The people who are helping you to know who you are, see who you are, that are having conscious and unconscious conversations about those cultural groups that you all named earlier. Who taught you who you were, how you were supposed to be? And this can be positive or negative and anything in between, okay? By the way, as we're dialing back and figuring out, and also the unlearning conversation, remembering some of the things that, who taught us those things, even the things that we might have to unlearn. Yeah, someone said, I agree with supervisors. My mentor helped them become the person that they are. Seminary families. Yes.
Yeah, and I think, Perry, to your point, when we talk about first socializers, that's where I go to the parents and grandparents. And then as I get older, my socializers start to change, right? And that's where I would add church. I went to church every Sunday. I would add that I'm a private school kid from Atlanta. And so that community and those that community starting to become my socializers, right? And what were those early messages that I started to receive from the church, specifically a Southern church, right? A church in Atlanta, from the private school, from a private school community. And for me, some of those early messages were about perfectionism, as we're talking about things that we are unlearning. What does it mean to be successful? What does a family look like? And so again, as those early socializers, and then moving on as we got older, thinking about middle school, elementary school, middle school, high school, and how those socializers changed. And granted, like my parents were absolutely, and grandparents were still involved, but there's a lot more noise as we got older, for me at least. And so thinking about some of those early messages that I received of perfectionism and success and what a family looks like.
And shout out to, I need to also admit, TV, news, etc. had a role in the images and socialization constructs. Absolutely. I'm so glad that someone said that. Because I also was raised by MTV. I was raised by all the television shows, right? When we talk about representation, those are also all of how we absorb media contributes to who we are. Our next question: what was happening in your home? Or excuse me, what was happening nationally, globally, locally that had influence on your ways of life, hopes, and fears? So dialing it back, what were big moments? Were there wars going on? Were there things happening in your neighborhood? What were the stories that you were seeing on television, big events that were happening that you remember?
We've got a lot of 9/11, Rodney King, the race to the moon.
Sarai, I'm going to put you on the spot. I'm really interested for you, especially describing coming from Mexico, going to Utah, and the differences in that cultural experience, the language, the food, the religions, all of that. were there specific things that were going on there, even as you're moving back and forth, that you would say might have influenced you or taught you something?
You know, I mean, everything. I think even before, actually, the very reason my parents moved my brother and I to Mexico was because my brother was getting to a stage, he was 12 years old, and was getting bullied in school because he spoke Spanish in Utah. And so he would come home and refuse to speak Spanish to my parents who did not speak English. And so that's when it really became evident to my parents that one, you need to understand the culture, the traditions of where we come from and why we are the way we are. And at that same time, I was coming from school, 7, 8 years old, wanting to go to sleepovers. And if there's other Latinos here, you know that's a big no-no. Like, you're not going to go to sleep in someone else's house. And so how dare I even ask, and really not comprehending why I was being told no. So at that point, we moved to Mexico. But even what was happening in the news at that time, I remember it was such a big conversation between my parents, was the Reagan amnesty. And aging in the 80s, so aging myself. So I just remember them having very serious conversations about what is it that they needed to do, how is it that they needed to do, and the stress behind that, and even to a degree, the level of anxiety among their friends and other immigrant families of just what could potentially happen. And so that was what I do recall as far as early messaging, as it really set into us versus them. We may not be fully accepted and received. So with us even moving to Mexico, it was, okay, well, we're just not accepted there in the United States. And I will say, and please shut me down, but I will say, before we moved to Mexico, even at the age of 8, I thought, oh, wow, we're going to move somewhere where I will finally fit in. Like, I won't be this outside kid that has frizzy curly hair, that just looks different, and that her parents are so strict and mean. Like, I'm going to fit in. And we moved to Mexico, and that was the total opposite. I did not fit in. I was the American kid that was spoiled, that didn't speak Spanish properly. And it was a total reverse effect. So I can go on and on and on, but there we go.
Absolutely. And I'm hearing being confronted with stereotypes. I'm hearing what we feel is not enough, too much, right? And going into different areas. Someone even mentioned, similar to your story, that there was massive deportation of undocumented people, and the fear and the anxiety and the frustration that created for their family. Someone living in the Saudi desert as a refugee for 4 years. And how that contributes to not just how you feel about where you are, but wherever you're going, whatever that means. And also how we define home, Also, there's never enough time for this work. I just want to go on and name that. So if it's okay, can we go to the next question? What was happening in your home, in your neighborhood, in your community? One person in the chat already named divorce. What does that send you? What early messages does that send you about how relationships work, right? Gender roles in families. Other things going on in your neighborhood and your community. Tandra?
Okay, full transparency. I grew up with parents who were very young. In fact, they had me when they were in high school. And my father was in the Marine Corps, moved us from a very small town in Virginia to San Diego, where I had the privilege of growing up. But to be honest, what was happening in my home was domestic violence. And that had a significant impact on me. My mom, although she is biracial, seeing her, she looks like a white woman with red hair. So there was a lot of things that I was actually experiencing inside and outside of the home that I didn't really recognize because that was my norm. And I think what happens with that, when you talk about the realization of being, is looking back now as an adult, I see how all of that has shaped who I am as a woman, as a Black woman, the decisions I make. I do also want to add that even with the last question talking about global influence, because my parents were so young, I don't remember ever really watching the news growing up. In fact, I don't watch it now, but for different reasons. And so I didn't have access to a lot of things going on in the world because we weren't talking about it or watching it. But and I'm really dating myself, I mean, I have a grandkid, so you all probably figured it out, but for any of you who used to be in grade school and they would wheel that television into the classroom, I do remember watching the Challenger take off. I, to this day, can remember my teacher's face, like, what the heck do I do now? Like, this didn't go like it was supposed to, and we were all watching it. And I think that was really the first realization that I had of things that could actually happen. That has led to kind of some anxiety that I deal with now, other things that have layered on top of that. Because when you live in kind of a box, even if it's very unhealthy and unstable, you're used to that box. And you start seeing, when you step outside of it, these are all of the other things that can happen. So that's my story.
Thank you for naming that, and also for the vulnerability and sharing that. One of the things that is also happening in the chat, people describing sick parents, right? You described a tumultuous relationship inside your box, inside your home, and the impact that that had on you. And people being exposed to adults doing things when you're a child, that has significant impact on how safe you feel, on how seen you feel. We have people in the chat that are having to parent their parents at young ages, right? What does that teach you? How does that make you resilient in a way that you shouldn't have had to be resilient? How does that contribute to your realization of being? Erin had a story about her realization of being, and unfortunately, I don't think we're going to be able to get to it because we don't have enough time. But thinking about the outside factors and the inside factors that told you who you were supposed to be, the ways that we can break that down. Are you still the same person that was in that box, Tandra, to use your word? What are the things that you had to do to fight? What are the ways that you became aware of the person that you wanted to be as opposed to who you were then? And what are the positive and negative ways that has contributed to how you live your life now? How does it contribute to your work now? We also normally would be asking a question about who are your role models? Was there representations of their identities in your home, outside of your home, through the media, through television? Which parts of your identity lacked the representation, right? Who did you see? Who didn't you see? What did you need? And even now, asking yourself those exact same questions. I had a conversation with my husband about role models and if I had any, and there was a question of, was a role model supposed to be someone that had qualities that you actually possessed or that you wanted to possess, right? And was there a difference? Was there a value put on either one of those? So these are just some of the questions as we're thinking and unpacking how we show up in the world. Why do we show up the way that we do? And what are the things that we might need to unlearn in order to authentically show up the way that we want to?
So we're going to put up one quote. It's from Dr. Jen Wright. It is from the 4 Pivots. If you have not read it, I would highly, highly recommend it. And Perry and I read it together, and this is something that we use all the time, and self-reflecting. And so it says, letting go of myths is not easy because it means that we have to admit to ourselves that the stories we live by simply aren't true. And again, after this webinar, think about this quote and think about all of those stories that we were told, you know, again, from our parents, grandparents, churches, schools, all supervisors, whoever, right? Television. And then when we had that realization of that's just not true, that stereotype's not true, my relationship isn't going to be like that, whatever it is, right? And so again, using this quote to really reflect and think about, and there may be stories that you have an aha moment today in watching this webinar where you're like, oh my gosh, like, holy cow, it just punched me in the gut, and I realized that actually this is untrue. And now what do we need to do with it? And so again, this self-reflecting part, and then we always want to leave folks with action steps. What do we do, right? And thinking about how these early messages impact how you show up at work, how you show up in your community, how you show up in your relationships. And again, taking all of these questions that we've been talking about today and reflecting on them and moving forward and saying, these are the stereotypes that I'm bringing into my work, or these are the, this is the baggage. Let's just call some of it what it is, right? This is the baggage. This is the trauma. There's a lot of trauma that is happening in the chat. And so again, acknowledging the vulnerability of even sharing things, you know, with us today. But again, what are the things that have impacted us and continue to impact us? And then after today, what are the things that we still need to unlearn? I shared earlier, I still need to unlearn picking up my phone at 6 a.m. I still need to unlearn that if I don't have a meeting tomorrow, that's okay. Doesn't mean that I am not important. Doesn't mean that, you know, that I'm not good at what I do. It just means that maybe I need to rest tomorrow, and unlearning all of those things of we have to be busy, we have to be meeting, we have to be doing all of those things. And so with the few minutes that we have left, we want to just share some resources and some, oh no, sorry. This is one of the biggest things. This is the cycle of socialization. If you haven't seen it, check it out. This is from Malia Dunn, who also adapted it from Bobby Harrow in 1997. This is what we're talking about here, is this cycle of socialization, right? The beginning of where we were born, even and going back to the question of where you live and how that impacts your culture, right? Where we were born, the beginning, the first socializers, and then the institutional and cultural socialization. And then in July, we'll start getting into the second half of the cycle of socialization, where we'll really start talking about, again, what we were taught about our own culture, and then also what we were taught about other people's cultures, right? And how those differ with those early messages. And so if you don't know the cycle of socialization, please definitely check it out. And again, in July, we'll talk more about the second half of the cycle of socialization. So some activator steps. So we talk about being activators, being an ally, a co-conspirator, or an activator. We believe that we do both. Again, like thinking about that self-reflection of, are you an ally all the time, or are you an ally when it is just for somebody that you know, right? Or a community that you belong in. And so thinking about that. Using inclusive language, Perry and I said, we believe in the power of language. This is from the Privilege Institute. It's an awesome resource, using inclusive language. And additional resources, y'all know Malia Dunn. If you've spent some time with University of Phoenix, she is launching an online course. It's called Embrace. Please check it out. Perry is on a podcast, In Pursuit Of. It is about building anti-racist relationships with Black folks, white folks, different communities. And so please check that out. I've got 1 minute. So Sarai and Tandra, thank you all so much. There is so many more early messages that we could dive into, and we just appreciate the opportunity to be a part of this. So thank you.
Thank you. This was so good. I have to tell you all and be honest, when Sarai and I found out we would be joining, we were like, oh shoot, we have to join for the full hour instead of just working behind the scenes. But this was so fun. We're talking about such heavy content, but really enjoying the conversation as well. I want to thank everyone who participated. Having you all engage so actively in the chat was almost like having you on screen with us. It was like a community chat today, and I loved it. And if you loved it, come back. We're doing this again next month. Join us on July 20th, when Aaron and Perry are going to move into part 2 and maybe a little bit of what they couldn't cover today. Maybe we can cover the psychosocialization at the beginning of that, just to make sure everyone understands. But join us, come back next month. I am rambling just so you have time to copy and take a picture of this QR code or the link in the chat so you can get registered. Thanks for those of you who are saying you already signed up. We're happy to have you here today. We look forward to seeing you next month. Have a great rest of your day. Enjoy Pride Month. Happy Juneteenth and all of the things. Bye, everyone.